Well, good morning and happy Columbus Day. The first topic that I have is one of enormous importance because we are growing closer and closer to confronting a very real danger of a nuclear war. Ukrainian President Zelensky is urging NATO to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. He believes that NATO should make it impossible for Russia to use nuclear weapons. And while he was addressing an Australian audience via video link, Zelensky said, "We need preemptive strikes so that they'll know what will happen to them if they use nukes and not the other way around. So don't wait for Russia's nuclear strikes and then say, oh, since you did this, take that from us," he was quoted. Well, Zelensky was clearly calling for a nuclear first strike against Russia, sort of suggesting that the United States stage a nuclear Pearl Harbor on Russia, where missiles rain down on Moscow and St. Petersburg, and as Russian women are pushing babies in baby strollers through these cities, all of a sudden there are mushroom clouds and people are vaporized and irradiated and so forth. Now, after Zelensky said this, his office later tried to walk it back. But then it was followed very shortly by Joe Biden calling the prospect of Armageddon the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, a lot of people rushed out and condemned Joe Biden for saying that we were in a very dangerous situation. Here's what he said. This is Joe Biden. "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." He then went on and he said, "We are trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp," Mr. Biden said, adding, "Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself where he does not only lose face, but significant power?" Well, I agree with President Biden. I think today the prospect of Armageddon, I would disagree a little bit. It's not merely the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think it is much higher because the difference is during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union had fairly modest nuclear power. They had some missiles, they had detonated bombs. They clearly had the ability to strike American cities, but we were so vastly superior to the Soviet Union in missile strike capability that there was just simply no match. It's different today. Russia has mammoth nuclear power. They're a relatively modest military power as far as air and ground power is concerned. They're not a terribly militaristic country, but they do rely on nuclear power to back up their position and basically to use to defend the homeland. It's interesting, the reaction to all of this nuclear gamesmanship going on. The New York Times they've previously warned, or I would say they have voiced unease about the constant escalation with this war in Ukraine. And actually, even the Washington Post has done that once or twice. The New York Times said that Mr. Biden's references to Armageddon were highly unusual for any president. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago this month, occupants of the Oval Office have rarely spoken in such grim tones about the possible use of nuclear weapons, much less talked openly about off-ramps. Mr. Putin said he would use all available means to defend Russian territory, which he has declared now includes 4 provinces of eastern Ukraine that Russia illegally annexed in recent days. That's what the New York Times is saying. And then he goes on to say that President Putin of Russia said that the atomic bombs the U.S. dropped on Japan in 1945 had created a precedent for doing things of this sort. So it is remarkable just how close we're coming to nuclear war when peace was at hand just 2 months after the war began. There were, this initial clash. There were people killed, but the numbers of dead were not high on either side. And Russia and Ukraine sat down at the peace table. They hammered out a peace agreement. This is just 2 months after Russia came across the border, and they had the framework laid out. The details had to be fleshed out. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK flew unannounced suddenly into Kiev, and he demanded that they put an end to the peace talks. He said there's no way that the rest of NATO was going to be supportive of peace, that the war must continue. And it was Boris Johnson. Now, before you jump on Boris Johnson and say that he's the devil himself, I'm not speaking up for Boris Johnson, but I'm just telling you, Boris Johnson would never have done this without American permission. So the United States had decided this war must go on. The meat grinder, all of the many, many thousands of young men who have died on both sides, they died needlessly. Their peace was at hand. There was absolutely no reason for the war to continue, except that the United States and NATO decided this war would continue, because ultimately, let's face it, our goal is to break apart Russia. And then we've got all the boys from Davos, all these mega wealthy oligarchs, and their intention is to privatize whatever property is state-owned property in Russia and have it sold off at pennies on the dollar so that they can scoop up and become not just merely mega billionaires, but trillionaires. That is the ultimate goal of what's going on. There's kind of a follow-up article, and this was in Sky News, where Sky News, the host, James Morrow, said that President Joe Biden is trying to get us all killed. Joe Biden could start a nuclear apocalypse. Mr. Morrow believes that Biden's recent comments that they actually are putting the world at great risk with the potential for a nuclear apocalypse. And then here's a quote, and this is Mr. Morrow of Sky News. By publicly stating that Vladimir Putin has been backed into a corner and has no way out, that won't wind up with his power severely diminished, he has actually increased, not decreased, the chance of what could only be called a civilizational disaster. Well, that's one man's opinion, but I think it is a strange, kind of a mysterious thing going on, that American foreign policy, because it's on the other side of the globe, because it really doesn't involve Americans, it's not a vital national interest of the United States. American people don't pay much attention to it, and they don't know much about it. But if something happens and triggers a nuclear war, they will find out about it in a terrible, terrible way. All of us will. I will. Everyone that you and I know will. Now, here's something that's very interesting. Elon Musk, wealthiest man in the world, the head of the Tesla company, he has a peace proposal. Now, when he made this peace proposal, Lindsey Graham went berserk. Lindsey Graham is a consummate deep stater. And Elon Musk had dared to use the dreaded P word, peace. You're not allowed to say peace in today's America. It's a dirty word. It probably means white supremacy or something. Who knows what with all these crazies. But in any event, you must not speak about peace, because that might get the American people thinking, hey, why are we, if we can make peace, why are we talking about potentially having the majority of the world's population killed off and huge radiation clouds swirling around the world? But anyway, so Elon Musk has a proposal to end the war in Ukraine. I'm very familiar, I've studied this for a long time. Musk's proposal is actually a very practical and reasonable one. And what he's saying is that, okay, Russia has just conducted a plebiscite to determine whether the people in these 4 districts, these are places right on the border with Russia, but they're actually across the line in Ukraine. The people who make up those 4 districts are, for the greater part, Russian. Varies. Some of them are Ukrainian speaking. The vast bulk of them are Russian speaking people. And it's fairly obvious why they want to rejoin Russia. But what Musk is saying is, okay, understand people don't trust that Russia would conduct the elections fairly, although all things that I can determine suggest that it was a fair election in all 4 places. But in any event, it's not unreasonable that people who are less informed about it would question, okay? And I think that's a reasonable position to take. So what Elon Musk is proposing is that the United Nations conduct elections, independent, having nothing to do with the Russian army and that sort of thing, and that the parties must accept the results of the elections. Russia has already signaled its intention. If the UN conducts elections, they've indicated that yes, they would abide by them. If the elections go against them, they would leave. They would abide by the outcome and leave those areas. Now, interestingly, up until this week, Elon Musk was an idol for the Ukrainians because he gave them his Starlink battlefield coverage system that's given a tremendous advantage to the Ukrainian army over the Russians. But it seems that something has happened and that Elon Musk has gradually come to understand that Russia really didn't start this war. This war started in 2014. The Russians avoided getting involved until just this year, February the 24th of 2022, when they came across the border up around the area of Kiev. But the war had been raging around the Donbass for many years because in 2014, the United States overthrew the legitimate, duly elected government of President Yanukovych. They drove him from office. He had to flee. The U.S. selected the makeup of the new government and put people in position as a puppet government, and then began pouring weapons in to arm this and to build up a tremendously powerful Ukrainian army to make war against Russia. I think Elon Musk he's gradually beginning to understand what happens. Now Musk also, as part of his peace proposal, he said that as part of it that Ukraine should definitely just acknowledge that Crimea is a part of Russia, that except for a historical anomaly, it has been part of Russia since 1776, since we declared independence from Great Britain. So Musk says he still supports Ukraine, but he is concerned that escalating the conflict could be disastrous for the entire world. Now, in addition to saying that Crimea should be assured as a part of Russia, it should be guaranteed to be part of Russia, that Ukraine should be a neutral state. Now, it is interesting that Kiev responded to Elon Musk's peace proposal with just rage, and they have the most undiplomatic diplomats in Ukraine that you can imagine, and so their ambassador there used profanity. He cursed Elon Musk after Musk gave them $80 million worth of battlefield intelligence equipment, and so here he is cursing him out using the F word, and but in any event, Ukraine has no interest in self-determination. They do not intend to allow the Russian-speaking people along the border to determine their own future. They intend to impose their will on the Russians on the border through military power, and to recapture those border areas and to force them to submit. And ultimately, they intend to purge their population of its majority-speaking citizens, its majority Russian-speaking citizens. Okay, this is the final topic today, and this is an article entitled "Berlin Denounces Washington's Astronomical Profiteering." What is all this about? What it is that ever since this war was launched in the Ukraine, and in my view, it was launched by NATO. Yes, Russia came across the border, but it was NATO that initiated the war in 2014, built it up, forced Russia's back to the wall. In any event, as a result of all of this, the U.S. ordered the EU, or at least suggested to the EU and to NATO, that they impose sanctions on all Russian imports. And that affected many things, but especially the import of natural gas. Russia had a wonderful relationship with Europe for decades, where Russia has vast natural resources. They would supply them to Europe. Europe, especially in Germany, would convert those natural resources to refined chemicals and technology and automobiles and things, and then trade those back to Russia. It is a tremendous relationship if it's allowed to function, but the United States made it quite clear we had no intention of allowing that trade relationship to go on. And in particular, we wanted the trade in natural gas because natural gas is it is the artery that feeds the heart of Europe, and you cut the artery and Europe dies. And we have cut the artery. We destroyed the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines through covert operations under the sea. And the day following the bombing of the 2 pipelines, the underseas operation that set bombs in place. The day following that, Norway announced the opening of a gas pipeline into Europe. So how convenient. NATO's got it all figured out. They'll cut off Russia. They'll bring in gas from Norway, but not enough to take care of Europe, because the United States will provide much of the natural gas at much inflated cost from the United States. It's very expensive. I think it is about double the cost when you have to do this very expensive process of liquefying the natural gas. It's very hard to liquefy. It has to be at a terrifically cold temperature before it turns liquid. And then you have to put it in very expensive specialized ships, have to ship it across the ocean. Then you have an expensive process to regasify it, to turn it from a liquid back to a gas and on to the pipelines. So in any event, Berlin is very upset about the escalation in the cost. The German Minister of the Economy, Robert Habeck, said that says some countries, including friendly ones, sometimes achieve astronomical prices for their gas. And when he says some country, he's talking about the United States, but Germany has suffered mightily under the United States a couple of times. They don't intend to do it again. So they're a little bit delicate in the way that they approach the U.S., but they are upset. The German people are terribly upset. They're beginning to stage public protests. Huge protests in Czechoslovakia, government changes in Sweden, in Italy. Tremendous protests have just broken out in France, and all of this really stems back to the U.S.-inspired sanctions on Russian products, and particularly the cutoff of natural gas that occurred when we were, I believe, we don't have an admission by the U.S. government, but I believe the United States blew up both pipelines. And I think the reason that they did is it's clear that as the cold weather sets in, there's a degree of panic setting in Europe. There's hoarding of firewood. There's hoarding of trash, cardboard, paper, trash that can be burned. People are actually putting up fences to guard looters against coming in and stealing their firewood when people get really desperate if there's a cold winter. And so what we wanted to do, what the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department wanted to do, is to take some of the steam out of the European protests, particularly in Germany, by saying, all right, you can clamor all you want for Russian gas, but you can't get it because we've destroyed the pipeline, so you're not going to get it anyway. It may work. The U.S. may have pulled off a real coup and blocked the ability of the European people to express their views, to petition their government for relief by cutting off the means of relief. No one has ever accused the United States of being overly democratic with our overseas activities. Well, in any event, we have Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and he is saying that that the destruction of the pipelines is a tremendous opportunity to wean EU states off of Russian energy. And then initially, I think the United States tried to float the idea that Russia had just decided to blow up its own pipelines. And that struck people as being so patently absurd that it was almost sort of a backhand admission of guilt, that nobody believed that. And if you don't believe that Russia did it, then you really end up with the United States and the UK, which always work hand in glove. I mean, they're essentially a single governmental agency when it comes to overseas foreign policy. And so there was a lot of people who have spoken out about the United States and UK blowing up the pipelines. I know Colonel Doug McGregor, very respected individual, has indicated that while he doesn't necessarily arrive at the conclusion that I do, he says that only the US and UK really have the capacity to destroy these pipelines. So then Anthony Blinken, he reacted with dismay that people would suddenly discover who really had done this. He said, I really have nothing to say to the absurd allegation from President Putin that we are, or other partners or allies, are somehow responsible for this. Well, then who was it? The man in the moon? He's saying even our allies, nobody in NATO is responsible for this very complex deep sea endeavor where we simultaneously destroy two. These are not little pipelines, okay? These are not mom and pop pipelines. These are arteries feeding the beating heart of Europe. And so he's saying, oh, it couldn't have been us. It had to be somebody else. Nobody believes it's Russia. You think maybe it was Somalia. Maybe it was North Korea. Yeah, we don't like those people. Let's blame it on, well, baloney. All of the evidence points to a U.S. initiated destruction of the pipelines feeding gas to Europe. Let's just be honest about it. And then the day after we destroy those, Norway announces, okay, we have a pipeline and we're opening it today. How convenient. So where we are right now, firewood is in hot demand all across the continent as citizens struggle to heat their homes. What is apparent by all of this is that the deep state, the one world order, the globalist, they don't give a rip about the people, not the people of Europe, not the people of the United States, not the people of Russia or Ukraine. They are in this out of a sense of greed, a desire for power, for dominance, a power to rule all people as autocrats, they don't believe in free determination. They don't believe in free votes, free elections. They believe in dominance and tyranny, and they intend to achieve it at any cost, even if that means risking nuclear war. Well, I hope that's not where we end up. I hope that the American people begin to wake up. Our problem right now is that it's both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that are all in for war, willing to go right up to the line and have most Americans killed if necessary, just to show that nobody's going to tell them anything. So anyway, we suffer from enormously poor leadership these days. Hopefully it will improve. We'll find out soon. But anyway, thank you for this long presentation. It's really 2 back-to-back presentations today. I hope that you have a great Columbus Day, and we will be back with you soon. God bless you. This has been Dick Black, Focus on the News.